It's time for Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, inviting the atheist, agnostic, and skeptic to examine for themselves the evidence for the Christian faith. We are all limited by what we do not know and by the things we think we know but are not true. Dr. Joe Mott earned his PhD at LSU and was a distinguished math professor at Florida State University for 38 years, helping to write 3 math textbooks and authoring over 30 research articles in math. He is now the host of this radio program, Defending and Commending the Faith. Here is Joe Mott.
Hello to everyone. Welcome to the program. Followers of Christ are still being called into action for defending and commending the Christian faith. We have been discussing elements of evidence against Darwin's theory of evolution. Previously, I had given 4 such elements. I begin today with the 5th evidence against Darwinism. This 5th evidence is the contradiction between gradualism, advocated by Charles Darwin, and the theory of punctuated equilibrium, developed by Stephen Jay Gould and Nyles Elderedge in 1972. Punctuated equilibrium allows for the sudden appearance for many new species like in the Cambrian Explosion. Not only is there a contradiction between these 2 theories of Darwinism and punctuated equilibrium, but the Cambrian Explosion, which is incorporated within punctuated equilibrium, also refutes the idea of gradualism. Richard Dawkins, the famous biologist from Oxford University, the author of many books supporting evolutionary thought, and also known as the world's most renowned atheist, admits in the book Blind Watchmaker on page 83, evolution is very possibly not, in actual fact, always gradual. But it must be gradual when it is used to explain the coming into existence of complicated, apparently designed objects like the eyes. For if it is not gradual in these cases, it ceases to have any explanatory power at all. Without gradualness, in these cases, we are back to miracle, which is a synonym for the total absence of naturalistic explanation. Really, it seems to me that what Dawkins has actually identified is a major flaw in evolution. 6th evidence. Some Darwinian evolutionists claim that evolution is the cause of the universe. But Dallas Willard, the UCLA professor of philosophy, has pointed out that Darwinian evolution cannot be a theory of origins of the universe because it requires entities, behaviors, and an environment that includes propagating organisms that natural selection can choose its offsprings for survival. Until a functional biological entity exists, there is nothing for natural selection to act on. The universe existed approximately 10 billion years before natural selection could get involved. Darwin only helped explain the survival of existing species, but neither he nor anyone else has been able to document the arrival of new animal kinds by natural means. What's the conclusion? Natural selection cannot create, only eliminate. What then is the source of new genetic material that would have to exist if a new species came into being? That is a crucial question we all must attempt to answer. 7th, The second law of thermodynamics goes against Darwinian evolution. The second law says that in the natural course, things begin to degenerate by going from an ordered state to a disordered state. The universe is running down, not evolving upward, as Darwin's theory claims. Eighth, evolution's blunders, frauds, and forgeries is the title of one of about 40 Jerry Bergman's books. In this book, Bergman shows that the frauds are attempting to demonstrate Darwinism is legitimate, despite the fact that major problems have always existed and still exist in the worldview of evolution. Bergman says, the scientific method requires understanding that all scientific theories are provisional, open to modification or rejection by new scientific information and experiments. If the evidence warrants, all theories of science must be updated to reflect current knowledge and understanding. We are aware that Aristotelian physics was overturned by Newtonian physics, and Newtonian physics was supplanted by Einsteinian physics. However, Darwin displayed exactly the opposite approach to his theory. Namely, he just added to his theory the solution to an objection and kept on as if nothing really happened. The transition from the original claims in Origin of Species to neo-Darwinism is an example of such a tactic. The best-known examples of fraud included the Piltdown Man, which proved to be a composite of a human skull and an ape jaw. The evidence for the Nebraska Man turned out to be the pig's tooth. Ernst Haeckel published drawings of embryos in various species, which he claimed showed a clear evolutionary progression. Darwin himself said the similarity among vertebrate embryos was, quotes, by far the strongest single class of facts in favor of his theory, end quotes. But Darwin was misled. Haeckel's images were later exposed as a fraud. Haeckel fudged his sketches, making them look far more similar than they really are. In Haeckel's own day, scientists and his colleagues already knew that he faked the sketches. Yet only recently has the scientific community begun to expose the falsehood publicly. This event has been called, quote, one of the most famous fakes in biology, end quote. Yet the same drawings, or similar ones, continue to appear in biology textbooks. In 1980, the magazine Newsweek announced a conference titled Macroevolution held at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History. Paleontologists told biologists what they least wanted to hear, namely, that the fossil record does not and never will support the Darwinian scenario of a smooth, continuous progress of life forms, nicely graded from simple to complex. Instead, the rocks show a pervasive pattern of gaps. New life forms appear suddenly with no transitional forms leading to them, followed by long periods of stability during which they show little or no change at all. Stephen Jay Gould called this, quote, the trade secret of paleontology, end quote. I learned this fact from the book Total Truth by Nancy Pearcey. The Java Man was initially presented as a key link between humans and apes, but was later shown to be the remains of a Homo erectus, not a missing link as originally claimed. A widely circulated claim in the 21st century suggested that human DNA was 99% identical to chimpanzee DNA. While the similarities are high, later research revealed that the actual genetic overlap is lower than originally stated, and differences in the regulation of genes are significant. Objections to evolution have been raised since evolutionary ideas came to prominence after Darwin's 1859 publication of Origin of Species. Darwin said little about the origin of man, but what he did say affected man's position in the public mind. The consequences for man, according to Darwin's hypothesis, were clear. Humans were no longer the pinnacle of creation. They were no longer the center of the living world, created beings made in the image of God. They were not the product of a divine plan, because evolution has no plan. The Origin of Species shattered the 19th century belief in humans' traditional role. While most people might be able to name one or two of evolution's deceptions, few are aware of the sheer multitude of deceptions used to prop up Darwin's evolutionary theory. Some, like the Piltdown Man fraud, took many decades to uncover, while leading evolutionists kept singing its praises to an indoctrinated public. Who knows all the deceptions that were invented to support the supposed fact of evolution? The countless fakes and mistakes are not mild aberrations in a self-correcting march to truth. For example, supposedly expert academics were so successful in convincing people that evolution was true that frauds and forgeries like the Piltdown Man and the embryonic drawings of the German biologist Ernst Haeckel's were completely ignored. It took decades for these frauds and forgeries to be exposed. Yet, even now, after their exposure, school textbooks still portray them, and some in the media still treat these frauds as the truth. Recently, the National Geographic magazine triumphantly proclaimed a hybrid fossil as an ideal, quotes, intermediate, end quotes, between birds and dinosaurs. Their forced retraction of this glued-together monstrosity was barely picked up by others in the media. For over 60 years, I have witnessed this happen over and over again. I remember when I was in college that some atheist was ridiculing those who believed the Bible was trustworthy, saying there was no evidence that there was the nation of the Hittites. But since around 1905, there was in a museum at the University of Chicago exhibiting artifacts of the Hittite dynasty. Atheists will do anything, no matter how devious, to try to prove there is no God. An evolutionist will do the same thing to try to prove that Darwinism is true. Several branches of creationism, including intelligent design people like Stephen C. Meyer, Philip Johnson, Michael Behe, and David Berlinski, argue that the idea of life being directly designed by intelligence is at least as scientific as evolutionary theory, and should therefore be taught in public education. Such arguments against evolutions have become widespread and include objections to evolution's evidence, methodology, plausibility, morality, and scientific acceptance. The scientific community does not recognize such objections as valid, pointing to detractors' misinterpretations of such things as the scientific method, evidence, and basic physical laws. That seems to me to be a real stretch of imagination, scraping at the very bottom of the barrel of objections, while at the same time closing their eyes to the truth. Allow me to close this episode by reminding you, exercise daily, walk with God.
Thank you for listening to Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott, a production of Wave 94 Radio in Tallahassee, Florida. If you have any questions or comments for Joe, please forward them to Doug Apple at Wave94 at this email address, dougapple@wave94.com. And be sure to join us every Monday evening at 6:45 p.m. on Wave 94 and subscribe through your favorite podcast app. Defending and Commending the Faith with Joe Mott.